Hey guys, Keely Reason here, owner of Love Hope Adventure, where I talk about the marriage relationship, intimacy in marriage, and how you can go deeper with your spouse. Today I'm answering a question that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I have a lot to say about it. It's about modesty. I haven't spoken much about this, but it is something that I have been worked through in my life, and I have a lot to share. So the reader says, I wanted to give you a difficult question as an idea for a future video. As a Christian, or as in general a mature woman, what do you think about wearing bikinis to the beach? I have a teenage daughter. I'm shocked at how revealing bikinis and swimsuits are today. I bought a one piece from Target thinking it would be modest and found it was too cheeky to wear this summer. What is appropriate for Christian or in general modesty for women in swimwear? How should we explain this to our young teenagers? Okay, so a lot of this modesty philosophy comes from this scripture in the Bible, 1 Timothy 2:9 and 10. I also want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. So this is where our modesty conversation often starts in churches. Well, here in Timothy, the women were told to dress modestly. There's no dress code listed here. The only thing we do know is that we shouldn't have elaborate hairstyles, gold, pearls, or expensive clothing. There are some faiths, like some church type of congregations like Mennonites, who don't wear any of that stuff because of this scripture. However, I see a lot of churches who teach that women should cover up as modesty, don't teach they shouldn't have gold, pearls, expensive clothing, or elaborate hairstyles. This verse is really talking more about not being vain, not spending so much energy and time on your outward looks that you're not focused on the inward part of you, and about showing up the people in church, coming into the congregation, into the church, to put all eyes on you. Look at how rich I am. Look at how much I have, whatever. That's really what this verse is talking about. It's not necessarily talking about a specific dress code. Modesty is all subjective. It's all about where you grew up, how you grew up, what you were taught. Modesty is totally a personal thing, as in the way modesty is like modest clothing, what we think of today. But this verse is really about modesty in how expensive your clothes are, how much time you're spending, whatever, on your looks. Now, sometimes we think that when we read something in the Bible that was written to one of the churches, that applies to us today in our context. And that's not really true. I mean, Jesus didn't talk about modesty like this or give any directives to women regarding modesty or what they wore. So sometimes we think, okay, well, if something was written to a church, that is relevant to us today. And that's not always the case. Just remember that when we're reading these letters to the churches, they are addressing issues that we may not be experiencing today. They were in that day. This is how we recommend that you live in the context of today as a follower of Christ. This wasn't a mandate. It wasn't a sin. He just says, I want women to dress modestly. Okay. I mean, yes, youth groups have rules on what is appropriate swimwear, so do schools. But that doesn't mean that this is something that all Christians of all time need to follow because this was sent to a church in a letter in that time period with what was happening at that time. We can make this more relevant today, right? So if you look at how people dress in churches now, compared to when I was a teenager, and even back it on up even more than that, things shift in the culture. And I can only assume that in that culture at that time, these were some issues they were trying to address. When I was growing up, you wore a dress on Sunday morning if you were a woman. Never pants. Pants were barely something you could wear more casual, but you wore dresses. And dressing up meant a dress every single time. Fast forward to today, you go to church and people are wearing all kinds of different things. Far more casual. In general, in America, we are more casual. Culture has changed. When I was in youth ministry and my husband was a pastor, I was still dressing like I did in the 90s in my college and everything, because we were young when we got in ministry. And I remember some of the youth come into church and seeing the way I was dressed and saying, I can't come here. I don't have clothes like that. What should I do? And it was then that I realized I have to change the way I dress. So the advice that I would have to somebody in youth ministry or in any ministry is to dress like the people who are coming in. And I think that is really where the root of that is coming from, where they're addressing this in the church based on the situations that were happening at that time. Now, the second part of the modesty discussion that we have is about not being a stumbling block to your brother in Christ. Or, well, I mean, it's brothers and sisters. But we always want to put that on a woman to make sure she doesn't dress in a way that makes a man lust after her. And if she does dress in that way, then she is guilty. He's guilty for lusting, but she's guilty for dressing that way and causing him to. This is a really big problem because it makes women feel ashamed of their body. I was ashamed of my body for many, many years, decades, because I was taught that I needed to dress modestly so that I wasn't a stumbling block to men. Okay, but here's the problem. I lived in a city where I dealt with a ton of sexual harassment. And inner cities are like that. Certain urban areas are like that. And every time I walked down the street, no matter how modestly I dressed very modestly, I dealt with sexual harassment. Men were hollering out their cars at me, stopping to try and pick me up so that I could go sleep with them, waiting on the corners for me to get near them so they could, God only knows, I hope, just talk to me, but maybe snatch me. I don't know. There were a lot of predators where I lived, right? And so I was being told, if you dress modestly, you won't be a stumbling block to men. Meanwhile, I was dressing modestly, and I was obviously being a stumbling block to men. And these men on the streets, they were speaking to me in a way that men in church weren't going to speak to me, at least not openly. So I thought, there's no way that the men in the church around me aren't feeling the same thing as these guys on the street. They're just not verbalizing it to me because that would be wrong. That would be disrespectful. They're going to respect, at least respect me by not saying anything. That created a lot of internal struggles for me because I spent so much time and energy on making sure that everything I wore was modest and covered everything and you could never see anything, that it was truly discouraging. And yeah, it was hard. When I was 35, maybe about there, I really started changing my mind on modesty because my kids I have 3 boys, and they were nearing, 6, 7, whatever, the oldest ones. I decided that I was not going to teach my boys that girls who dressed a certain way were floozies or wrong or trying to get their attention, whatever. Instead, I decided to change the way I dressed and start normalizing them being around a person, being around their mom who dressed more like what they would see with people out on the streets. This way, they didn't have to deal with that idea that is put into them that if a woman is dressed sexually or sexy, if you think it's sexy, then she, she's wrong. She shouldn't be dressed that way. You gotta, steer clear of that one. I started wearing two-piece bathing suits, bikinis, not because I look good in them, not because my body was made for it, what have you. I did it because I didn't want my kids going to the pool and seeing girls in bikinis and dealing with arousal or dealing with idea of, I don't know what to do because I don't know where I can look. Because we taught boys, well, don't look at girls in bikinis because that is bad. It's not wrong to feel aroused by somebody that is attractive. What's wrong is when you're lusting after them, when you are focusing on them, undressing them in your mind, visualizing having sex with that person, taking it far beyond that, obsessing over those things. But being attracted to somebody who's beautiful or handsome or having an arousal reaction is not wrong. Those are normal. That's what happens. You are attracted, you might feel aroused. Acting on it, pursuing it, that's where the problem comes in. So I didn't want my kids to start feeling like, if we taught them, well, women in bikinis are bad and that's always sexy and never look at a woman in a bikini, how was I taking them to the pool? How was I going to take them to the water parks? So I started wearing two-piece bathing suits. And it was hard for me, very hard for me, because I had never once shown my midriff whatsoever, ever, in any context. It was hard for me, but I did it for my kids. And I remember going to a pool party about 7 or 8 years ago that was hosted by my Sunday school. And I didn't know what the adults in that Sunday school thought about two-piece bathing suits on women. So I very purposely wore a cover-up that I could get in the pool with. And my son asked me, why are you in the pool in that? Why are you still wearing that? And I said, well, there are some people here who might not be okay with two-piece bathing suits. I don't know, so I didn't want to offend anybody. And he was like, why would anybody be upset with this or offended by it? And I thought, this is why I did that. Because it's not even in his mind. We're there. We're just enjoying each other in bathing suits at the beach, in the pool. And in that context, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. And it doesn't have to be sexy and arousing. But I didn't want to teach my kids or perpetuate that, women can be a stumbling block to you. I didn't want to perpetuate that. The second thing that happened is I lost a lot of weight about 7 or 8 years ago. And in that time, because I'd never been that thin before, I had to go through some diet changes. And so I just really shed a lot of weight, like 40 or 50 pounds in a short time. And I started putting on some clothes that I had always been immodest. And I thought, wow, I don't look like I used to. Because I was very curvy. And I never wore a spaghetti strap. Never once. Not without a shirt over it. And I started putting on these spaghetti straps and realizing I don't look immodest or inappropriate like I'd always been taught. And that's what I realized. It was never the clothes. It was never the clothes. It was all about the way we have taught people to view females' bodies. Not just men, but women. Big chest, big butt, little waist, that's sexy. Think about the cartoon Betty Boop. So if you put a curvy body in any clothes whatsoever, especially any fitted clothes, this little part of your brain might go off and go, well, that's sexy. No, that's just a woman in her body wearing some clothes. I'm not saying you can't feel attracted to that. But this idea that she's being immodest because you were aroused, your little, thoughts go off, oh my gosh, how sexy is that? That is not her fault. And she should not be made to change on account of it. I think really what we should be teaching our sons and daughters is that focusing on the person who they are, becoming a person that follows Christ, a person who does good, who's benevolent, who is caring and kind and loving and gentle and not mean. Teaching our kids to focus on developing that in themselves. And that is what they should be desiring in a partner. As far as the clothes they wear, I feel that women should be comfortable. So if you are having if you go to the store and you get a bathing suit and your butt is literally like you've got a wedgie now, that is not at all comfortable to me. I'm not going to put on a bathing suit that, I have to worry about that. I would tell your daughters and encourage your daughters to find something that feels good on their body and that they can feel cute in. If you feel good in the clothes you wear, both the way you look, the way it feels on your body, the more confident you're going to be. And the less you're going to be worrying about your appearance. And the more you can focus on the things that are good. So those are my recommendations for the parents of a teenage daughters. If you have teenage boys, don't teach them that women are a stumbling block. Don't teach them that it is at all a woman's responsibility to not try and get their attention. Their responsibility is to be respectful to women, regardless of what they're wearing, regardless of their, nationality or their demographic or any of this. Be respectful of women. And don't take advantage of women. And if you feel attracted to a woman, that's not a problem. But rein in your thought life. And don't allow yourself to get so focused on boobs and butts that you miss the human being that is walking around carrying that. That's what we need to be teaching our boys and our men, not that women are a problem. And we have to teach our daughters, and I know this is not fun to think about, but we have to teach our daughters to protect themselves. And the way they dress is not a way to protect themselves. We teach women and our daughters that if they will dress modestly, they will be less targeted for sexual assaults. That is the biggest load of bullcrap. It's wrong. There's absolutely no data that shows if a woman dresses a certain way, she's more likely to be sexually assaulted. We have to teach our girls to be vigilant about who's around them, what's happening. That is protection. Don't walk in dark alleys at night on your phone. Pay attention. Give them some basic lessons of fending off, people around them. Give them a self-defense class. Do not think that the way they dress has any bearing on whether or not they may become a victim of sexual harassment or sexual assault. Because I'm telling you from firsthand experience, that is not the case. They can dress as modestly. They could put on a long gown from head to toe. Because I'm telling you, when pandemic happened, and I was wearing gloves, a mask, a hat, long sleeves, trying not to let a single bit of my skin touch anything, I was still dealing with it. So, don't believe the lies that what somebody wears is, making them ask for it. Teach your daughters to be protecting of themselves. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today. This one was heavy. I've recorded this video 4 times. Because it was a hard video to record. But I'm glad somebody asked, and I'm so grateful that you guys are here. Thanks for joining me. I'll chat with you later.